My name is Kirk Dunn, and this is the Knitting Pilgrim Talks. I'm an actor, writer, and knitter, and I'm also known as the Knitting Pilgrim. I earned that title because in 2003, I was awarded an Ontario Arts Council Chalmers grant to knit stitched glass, an installation of 3 large panels designed in the style of stained glass windows, which look at the commonalities and the conflicts between the 3 Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They took me 15 years to knit. And when the project was complete, my wife Claire and I wrote a play called The Knitting Pilgrim about my experience knitting stitch glass and my research into interfaith relations. One thing that wasn't covered in the play was the meaning behind the imagery in the knitted panels. So this series explores each section in conversation because ultimately the project is about having conversations with empathy and curiosity about how we understand and sometimes misunderstand each other. Welcome to the Knitting Pilgrim Talks. Today, we're looking at the 5 Hands of Peace section of the Islamic window. And you can find this just inside the crescent, just about 2/3 of the way up on the left-hand side. And you can see it there. And just a reminder that within the structure of the crescent moon and the star, those are the main symbols of Islam, within those images are all the where I place the positive images of the faith. And so this is very much a positive image of the faith, so it's inside that crescent moon. And you can see there's an image of 5 hands making the peace sign symbol, and then they meet at their extended fingertips. And the 5 hands represent the 5 continents of the earth, and their 5 different skin colors represent all the peoples in the world. And the shape they make is, when they join, is the 5-pointed star of Islam, which recalls the 5 pillars of Islam. And the idea behind this whole section was that Islam is meant for all people. And I remember in my research, I read a story about Malcolm X. And when he belonged to the Nation of Islam, he felt that Islam was the religion of the black man. But then, after he converted to the Sunni faith and he participated in the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, he witnessed Muslims of all ethnic backgrounds, and he came back and instead he said he saw Islam as a faith through which racial differences could be overcome. And to talk about this section and about this idea of the universal appeal of Islam, I am happy to welcome Imam Jamal Raman. Imam Raman is a sought-after speaker on Islam, on Sufi spirituality, and on interfaith relations. And since 9/11, Jamal has been collaborating with Rabbi Ted Falcon and Pastor Don McKenzie. And this trio, they're affectionately known as the Interfaith Amigos. They've been featured in the New York Times, on CBS News, on the BBC, and on various national public radio programs. Jamal is co-founder and Muslim Sufi minister at Interfaith Community Sanctuary and adjunct faculty at Seattle University. He's the former co-host of Interfaith Talk Radio, and he travels internationally and nationally presenting at retreats and workshops. And he's the author of 7 books, including Sacred Laughter of the Sufis, Awakening the Soul with the Mullah's Comic Teaching Stories and Other Islamic Wisdom. And as that title might tell you, Imam Jamal celebrates life through laughter, unity, and delight. And he is passionate about interfaith community building. And I am just thrilled to have him with us here today. Imam Jamal, welcome.
Delighted to be here, Kirk.
I wanted to ask about this ability of Islam to appeal to all peoples, especially considering the fact that it was originally seen as a revelation or a faith for Arabic peoples. But how has it become a faith that it can be embraced by all?
Well, the word Islam literally means to surrender in peace. But the question becomes, what are you surrendering? And if one reads the Quran, which is the holy book of the Muslims, the insight is that one is surrendering one's attachment to the ego, so that, as the Quran says, one can bring a heart turned in devotion to God. So, in that sense, it's meant for anyone who is willing to really let go of the attachment to the ego. And there are, in the Quran, like in any holy book, there are always two kinds of verses. This is what I and the Introvert Amigos, we talk about all the time. There are particular verses and there are universal verses. Particular verses are in desperate need of historical and textual context. Universal verses, timeless, placeless, filled with wisdom. Like the Quran says, Allah is the God of all of humanity. Everywhere you turn is the face of Allah. Then the Quran says, in theory, it says, it doesn't matter what your religion is, what your gender is, what your culture is. What takes you to heaven is actually having faith in the God of all of humanity, but mostly, I say mostly because it's repeated many times, doing righteous deeds. So this appeals to the human being. Doesn't matter where he or she is. One other important point is, in the Quran, it says, Allah created the human from water and clay, and then bestowed that human being, infused the human being with God's breath, the divine breath. It didn't say it was infused in the body of an Arab, in the being, the water and clay of a human being. So in that sense, it's very universal. That is why you find that most Muslims live in Asia. The misperception is that the majority of Muslims live in the Middle East. But if you add up all the numbers in the Middle East, it amounts to not more than 20% of Muslims. Whereas I come from South Asia, that's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. I'm from Bangladesh. That's over 40% of Muslims. If you add Southeast Asia, that's 60% of Muslims. So Islam is essentially an Asian religion if you go by the number of Muslims and where they live actually. So I would just say, to give you a short answer I gave you a very long answer. Muslims focus on the universal verses, yet there are particular verses. And I should mention that, for example, the description of heaven, metaphorically, it would appeal to people who live in arid desert, flowing rivers, filled with verdant green foliage. Then tempting the Arab men, there are beautiful women there, and they're all fair-skinned, and they're all wide-eyed. These are descriptions of women which would fulfill the fantasies of Arab men of the 7th century Arabia.
Right. Right. And as you say, those are particular verses.
That's right, yes.
And is that so? Those particular verses, are those I'll use the word again, a particular struggle for Muslims to deal with? I mean, do some people get caught up on those and spend too much time focusing on them and not on the universal verses?
Absolutely. This is the main problem in actually all the holy books. I'll give you an example. In chapter 551, there's a verse that says, "Do not take the Jews and Christians as your friends and protectors." They are friends and protectors of each other. Now, an extremist Muslim might take that verse and say, this is a holy revelation. You can never be friends with Jews and Christians. But what is the historical context of that? This verse came down at a time when Islam, the community there, the community of Islam, was a tiny, embryonic community, always in danger of being decimated because surrounded by enemies 10 times their strength. And to survive, the Muslims had military treaties because they lived in an environment of warfare, constant warfare, with the Christians and Jewish tribes, some of them. And according to Muslims, these particular Jewish and Christian tribes, at the height of the battle, depending on how the battle was going, they would renege, they would go back on the treaty. So that is the historical context. And why do I say that? Because if you go just a few verses down, 18 or 19 verses down, there's a universal verse in total contradiction to the particular one. It says, it doesn't matter what your religion is. And it specifies, you could be a Jew, you could be a Christian, you could be a Sabian. What takes you to heaven is not your religion. What takes you to heaven is having faith in God, but mostly doing righteous deeds. And that's
Right.
emphasized again and again in the Quran. I'm not saying that Muslims follow that, but this is what
Right.
there is in theory. But that's a good example to me of a particular verse and a universal verse.
Right. And it's that universalism that is that makes Muslim or Islam accessible to everyone. And as you said, it became very popular in Asia, which is what you're saying is that the majority of Muslims are Asian, and yet it's that universalism would apply to anyone anywhere in the world.
Absolutely. Say for example, even say in the West, there's a great fear in the West that a large number of people are converting to Islam. There's of course the fear that the birth rate of Muslims is growing at a very fast rate, but also the number of converts becoming Muslims is very large. For example, in the U.S. and in Great Britain. So one question is, why are non-Muslims converting to Islam? So there was a Pew Research just not too long ago, and the Pew Research said the number one reason was they're attracted to the spirituality in Islam, yearning for meaning in their lives, closeness to God. That is what attracts them primarily to Islam. And I suspect that's been the case also in the previous centuries. I'm sure there are other reasons also. But this is a primary reason, attraction to practices which bring you closer to spirit, to mystery, to divinity, and finding greater meaning in life. By the way, our community, we don't emphasize conversion. We emphasize transformation of the human being. I'm giving you the historical reason. This is a result of a Pew Research in America.
Okay, yeah, and the thing I think also that that can be included in that list of positive aspects you talk about there is it's that thing that Malcolm X remarked upon, is that it includes everyone. Everyone can be under this umbrella. It's not.
Yes.
It doesn't need to be exclusive.
The Quran says, "Everywhere you turn is the face of Allah." And I remember a very humorous remark by Malcolm X, who said that when he went to Hajj and he saw those Muslims from all these different countries, including Europe, white colored, Caucasian Muslims, as it were, and then he said, I realized that no matter what your color, what region you come from, everybody snores in the same language. So metaphorically, it's all one anyhow.
Yeah, that's very funny. Great. Imam, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your thoughts on this.
Thank you.
If you'd like to get in touch with Imam Jamal or stay up to date on one of his many projects, presentations, books, or courses, you can reach him through jamalraman.com. This has been an episode of the Knitting Pilgrim Talks. We'd like to thank the Ontario Arts Council for their support of this conversation series and their funding of Stitch Glass, and the Toronto Arts Council and the Canada Council for the Arts for their support of the Knitting Pilgrim Show. If you'd like to hear more conversations like this about interfaith matters, stitched glass, and knitting, please check out our episodes at kirkdunn.com or the Knitting Pilgrim YouTube channel.